What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about a show that I had no plans to review. I had no interest in it because, as a lot of you probably know already, I have not been a fan of a lot of the recent Disney Star Wars shows, especially the ones set in this weird Avengers Marvel crossover universe of TV shows that started with The Mandalorian. The Book of Boba Fett was a mess. Ahsoka was my least favorite Star Wars project ever made, so I wasn't looking forward to anything that creative team was involved in. To add insult to injury, John Watts was involved in the production of this show, who directed the two worst Spider-Man films ever made, so I was worried about Skeleton Crew, to put it lightly. But a lot of my friends told me it was really good. They thought I would like it, so I gave it a chance. Right before I went back to school at the beginning of January, I binged the first 6 episodes that were out at the time with my parents, and I found myself enjoying it. Now, I don't want to oversell how good I think this show is, because it has a ton of issues which only get worse by the end of the season, as we'll talk about later, but this show was enjoyable, and for the most part succeeded at what it set out to do. I think the reason for that, as my dad put it best, is because it returns to the swashbuckling roots of Star Wars. Don't get me wrong, stories with heavier themes and strong political undertones like Andor and The Bad Batch certainly have a place in this franchise. That's why they're my favorite projects to have come out of Disney Star Wars. But sometimes all you need is a good old-fashioned adventure, and Skeleton Crew brings that spirit of adventure back to Star Wars for the first time in a while. The story being told from the POV of children gives it a whimsical sensibility that we've been deprived of recently. With that said, there was a moment at the beginning where the kids look up at the stars for the first time that felt like a carbon copy of the scene where Omega sees space for the first time in The Bad Batch. But aside from those moments that felt quite derivative of other media, like the opening, which felt very Steven Spielberg in its style and setting, it was just fun watching this group of youngsters going on a journey into the unknown. It helps that the kid actors in this show are really good. Usually I don't pay much mind to the acting talent of children, but the kids killed it here. I found it interesting watching their bond develop over the course of the season, seeing each of their perspectives on the situations they find themselves in, especially with characters like KB and her own personal struggles, which are explored in a surprisingly effectively emotional way in episode 6. Or Fern, who puts on the facade of being, a cool, badass biker girl, but she's got a lot of insecurities underneath all of that. Surprisingly, I found Wim, the main character, to be the most boring of the bunch, probably because he has the most conventional hero's journey type character arc, whereas the other children are a bit more unique. But of course, I can't go on without mentioning that the kids are going toe-to-toe with Jude Law the entire time, who is proven to be a high-class actor. I love the guy, no matter what he's in, whether he's voicing the sinister Pitch in Rise of the Guardians, or playing the tortured soul that was a young Albus Dumbledore. He never disappoints. And his character was simultaneously my favorite and least favorite part of this show. What I liked about him is that on the surface he seems to be another Han Solo scoundrel-type character, but this guy doesn't have a heart of gold. He isn't a morally upstanding citizen like Han. However, we can see that he has some positive traits. They are just more often than not overtaken by the negative side of him. It was also interesting to see a hybrid pirate force user person in Star Wars. That's something I don't think we've ever really seen before. He's not a Jedi, as the kids would like to believe, and rather someone who's just picked up a couple tricks along the way, so he can use the Force, but only in a very light capacity, which made for some fun scenes throughout the show. And the last thing I'll say that I liked about this show is that it did feel like something new for the Star Wars franchise. The setup was intriguing. The idea of this hidden planet cut off from the rest of the Star Wars galaxy piqued my interest. I was curious where that was going and what answers we might receive by the end of the show. And thank God that it wasn't over-reliant on nostalgic iconography or cameos from classic Star Wars characters. Every other Star Wars show has to have a million people that you recognize showing up, even if it doesn't make sense logically within the story they've established. I can't tell you how sick I am of that. And this show has none of it. I was shocked, considering that it is connected to this whole Mandoverse Marvel crossover thing. But you wouldn't be able to tell, because aside from the one pirate guy who was in like a couple episodes of Mando, or the Republic being lightly involved in the conflict, it has no connective tissue to those shows or the rest of the Star Wars franchise. At a couple points, I forgot that I was watching Star Wars, which some might take as a negative, but in my mind, it's a huge compliment at this point, considering what the franchise has become. Now, all I've been doing in this video is singing the show's praises. You're probably asking yourselves, why did it disappoint him? What's wrong with the show? Well, after really enjoying the first 6 episodes, I came home this last weekend to watch the last 2, and it felt like I was watching a completely different show, because in the last 2 episodes, it devolves into the standard trademark bad writing I've come to expect from the Mandoverse. Just like all these other Star Wars shows that are limited to being 8 episodes or less, they didn't know how to resolve the story in a satisfying way. And that leads us into the reason why I kind of didn't like Jude Law's character, because not only does he devolve into a pretty stereotypical mustache-twirling villain, but his entire plan hinges on him being incredibly lucky, a character who was established as being somewhat of an intelligent schemer. He used the children to get what he wanted, and once they served their purpose, he stabbed them in the back. But in the last 2 episodes, he's just really lucky that the ship jumped out of hyperspace right at the second he needed it to, so he didn't get shot out the airlock into space. He's incredibly lucky that all the other pirates agree to follow him after he executes their leader. He's incredibly lucky that he made it onto the ship so he could hold the kids hostage, and he's incredibly lucky that this high-security hidden planet doesn't question his identity at all and lets him into their top-secret vault so he can sabotage everything. I'm not kidding. This society isolated from the rest of the Star Wars galaxy, which they have established as being so high security that they're incredibly suspicious of their own people, to a point where they're willing to chase down the parents of these children in a forest and stun them because they're going against protocol, doesn't question the identity of this random lightsaber-wielding guy who claims to be a New Republic emissary, who just so happens to have one of their ships and the 4 children that went missing recently. Later, we find out that the Stephen Fry AI overseer of this society suspected Jude Law as being a fraud anyway, so why'd they let him in? They let him get so close to the point where he was able to stab the AI in the eye and shut off power to the entire city. All you have to do to destroy the power for the entire planet is just jam a lightsaber into the AI who runs everything. There's no backup power supply or anything. That's all it takes. And of course, this facilitates the conflict for the rest of the finale, where the kids have to pull the magic lever to deactivate the barrier so the Republic can come to their rescue. Yay! Those are your answers. Are you guys happy? It turns out this super secret hidden civilization cut off from the rest of society was just really dumb, to the point where they almost allowed themselves to get wiped out by pirates. The only thing that saved them were these kids who just so happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'm really glad this is what it was all leading to. Look, I know people are gonna tell me it's a kids show. I shouldn't expect top-tier writing from a show like this. But last year we got The Bad Batch, a show with much more complexity and better writing than this. My issue with the show, and the finale in particular, is that it sacrifices something more interesting in exchange for dumb action, which is all these shows ever seem to do. Any moral ambiguity that may have existed with Jude Law's character previously completely goes out the window when he starts threatening the kids and their families with a lightsaber or bombarding the city. Why did he do that, actually? His plan was purely to get the credits. He even claims that he doesn't want to hurt anyone. So why'd you start attacking people? If they came in, got the credits, and hit the road, they probably wouldn't have gotten destroyed by the New Republic. But the pirates are just really dumb, so they didn't do what they went there to do. Why? At first, it was actually kind of menacing when he was threatening the kids with the lightsaber, saying that he'd carve up their parents one by one. But it turns out he's all talk and no action, because that's all he does for the entire last episode, but he never acts on any of his threats. Do you guys remember when Star Wars had a spine? Yeah, me too. George Lucas referred to the original Star Wars films as being for 12-year-olds, but do you remember when we saw Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen's charred corpses, or Luke got his hand lopped off? Yeah, me too. I miss those days. I'm not saying that having more violence would make the show better, but it feels like they couldn't commit. They wanted it to be a fun family adventure, but they also wanted it to have a darker edge. Then commit to showing Jod doing some messed up shit. The worst thing he does is point-blank execute the previous pirate captain, which was an effective moment, I'll grant you, but other than that, we don't see him do anything that malicious. He wasn't even evil enough to step on the mouse that occupied 33's eye socket. All he does is make loose threats that he never acts on. So why turn him into the villain if you can't even have him be villainous? What makes all this even more unsatisfying is that we'll probably never see this story continued, because it got the lowest viewership of any Star Wars show ever on Disney+. No one cared about it, which I honestly can't blame them for, especially after The Acolyte. But the fact is, the conclusion of this show is fairly open-ended. We don't know what's going to happen with Jod in future, or how At-Atin is going to adapt to the New Republic's rule. So it just kind of ended abruptly, and we'll probably never see it be continued. So I don't really care, and I'll probably forget about this show in a couple days, which sucks because I liked a decent chunk of it, but it didn't go anywhere. To be clear, I don't think this show is bad. As previously stated, it had a lot of solid elements which elevate it above 90% of recent Disney Star Wars products. I liked this more than anything else to have come out of the whole Mandoverse plot, but it disappointed me because it ended up becoming more of the same. It could have been great. It could have exceeded my expectations. It did at first, but then it got mid, and I'm really unhappy to say that. Because at the end of the day, it's just another forgettable Disney Star Wars product, which I did not want to say about this show. But I have to be honest, I actually heard someone say that they would put this on the same level as Andor, and I was like, whoa, buddy, slow down. It's not even close. Maybe it's just me. Maybe this show is not made for me. I'm obviously not the target demographic for it, but the fact that I enjoyed it more than I expected for a majority of the show speaks to what it could have been. It could have been the next Bad Batch or Andor, but it ended up falling somewhere in the middle. So, you guys let me know. What are your thoughts on Skeleton Crew? Do you agree with me that it wasn't as good as it could have been? Or do you disagree with me and think that it is great Star Wars and the best Star Wars since Andor? Just whatever your thoughts are. Please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye.